welcome everyone to the first installment of my new series, Rosie Reads, where I read recent fantasy books, romance, and anything in between, and maybe some wacky stuff as well. We'll see. For the first installment of this series, I am going to be reviewing the book Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. I just finished this recently, and I'm going to first give you a brief summary of the plot. So basically, it is a slice of life style story about a character called Viv, who is an orc barbarian, and she's basically part of this group that's very classic D&D style. She decides to retire and open a coffee shop, and she meets a lot of characters along the way, and settles down in the town of Thun. And the story is basically about all the different things she has to do, and setting up this coffee shop, and basically learning how to have a home and learning how to deal with this new community that she has. So, another part of the story is that her final boss fight, where she battles a monster, she takes this thing called the Skalvert Stone. And you're not really sure exactly what it does for most of the story, but it kind of seems like a lot of her good luck is to do with this stone. And there's some tension throughout the story of, is this coffee shop really going well, or is it just the stone? So that's the basic premise of the story. I really like the fact that it is a sort of fantasy version of a slice of life story. So firstly, I'm going to get into the things that I liked about this story. Okay. So I think the strongest thing in the story is the two female leads of the story, the orc barbarian Viv and her kind of co-worker Tandri. They sort of Tandri and Viv sort of co-own this coffee shop, and she meets Tandri pretty early on in the story, and both of them have a really interesting hook to their character. There's this idea that there's a sort of expectation of who these people are based on their sort of partly due to their fantasy races, and partly due to in the case of Viv, due to the fact that she's this massive barbarian, and you kind of expect them to act a certain way or be a certain way. Like with Viv, a lot of people are intimidated by her, and you sort of expect her to be really confident. But the really funny thing about Viv is she's actually very socially awkward. She's not used to like having to settle into a community, and she's used to getting things a certain way, basically by intimidating people and knowing that it'll be fine because she's stronger than most people around her, so she doesn't have to like ask for things normally. But with Viv, she's trying. There's this great like kind of idea that this is a very different type of life for her. It's a big life change, and she's trying to learn how to fit into a community and do it in a way where she doesn't have to resort to violence or anything like that. And there's a lot of scenes where Viv is very like kind of socially awkward and shy and says the wrong things. And the first time Viv and Tangerine meet, is really awkward because Viv makes a lot of assumptions about Tandri, which I'll get into in a minute, and she just says all the wrong things. And it's honestly quite an endearing part of her character where you'd expect her to just be uber confident all the time, because she is this badass, like, this badass woman, but she definitely she doesn't know what to do a lot of the time in these very new situations for her. And similarly, my favorite character probably in the whole story is Tandri, who is a succubus, and she is Viv's co-worker, and they become close friends. And Tandri is a really interesting take on succubuses, in my opinion, because it seems from the way she acts that she's been fighting against the how people see her whole life. She's probably been objectified since she was young, and she, because of that, she sort of tries to push like back on that as much as she can, and she comes across very like matter of fact, very logical, and she tries to hide her succubus powers and things like that. And she also has this like guy who who won't take no for an answer, and he keeps coming up to the coffee shop and kind of being the worst. And it just shows a really different part of dealing with that kind of stuff. And I think it did it in a very like discreet way, but a very interesting way. And I think that was really cool. I really liked her character, and I liked the way that when Viv and Tandri got to know each other, Viv would see little glimpses of the succubi powers that she has over time when they grow to trust each other more, which is interesting. Another thing I really liked was the sort of strong sense of community and the sort of atmosphere of Thun and the coffee shop itself. The way the sort of coffee shop was personified was really, really beautiful. The book as a whole just gives these really cozy and comforting vibes. A lot of the friends she meets along the way are really endearing, and you grow very fond of them throughout the story. And just the way the author invokes like the senses of the coffee being brewed and the town itself, and sort of gives this really beautiful romantic feeling to the whole thing. I thought that it was really clever how you could kind of tell the passing of time by small things like the different coffee machines they got and the way that the coffee shop was being built up from the ground up, and how the menu started to fill out, like they would make and create and invent like different drinks and baked goods and things like that. Eventually they get a baker who's really cute and there are parts of this book that make your mouth water because you're thinking about like these awesome baked treats that were just piping out of the oven, and it's really, really good stuff. I think that the overall personification of the coffee shop itself is one of my favorite things about the book, and it's one of the things I miss the most about the book. Like when I was finished reading it, I just wanted to be back in this cozy place that's so like safe and inviting. And yeah, all that stuff was really, really really, really good. I think that's pretty much all my favorite things about the book. So now let's get into the things that I didn't like so much, because there was a couple of things that I felt were a bit weaker. So we're going to discuss that now. So I think around halfway through the book, I felt like obviously from the tagline of the book, it says like high fantasy, low stakes, good company. And that's definitely a good description of the book. But I do feel like there's a midpoint around like here in the book, where things just get a little slow for me. It felt like everything was going a little too well, you know? Even with the skull, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but the Skullvert Stone, even with that subplot, like, you got occasionally her thoughts about, like, worrying that the reason things are going so well is because of this stone, and you find out more about that later. But even with that in mind, I felt like there just wasn't that much tension halfway through the book. Um, I felt it did get a little bit slow at that point. Um, the other thing that I thought was the weakest aspect of the book for me was the sort of secondary villain, as it were. There's sort of two villains in the story, and the first villain that shows up is an individual called the Madrigal, who's basically going around the town taking people's money, basically fining people and kind of shaking them up, and especially with the businesses, they're basically taking a portion of each business's money at the end of the month, even though they're not really supposed to be doing that, or they're not like landlords or anything. And it's set up to be this big conflict and this problem for Viv, because normally Viv could handle these people, you know. She's an experienced warrior and a fighter, but she also doesn't want to ruin her chances at a new life by causing a big violent stir in the town. So you have this sense of urgency and tension with this storyline. And I thought that it was handled, when it was handled very quickly with this Madrigal character. And I felt like it was kind of disappointing how it was handled. The way that Viv got out of this situation was, I won't give spoilers, but in my opinion, it was a little bit silly. It just wasn't very satisfying, especially since, like, for me, I was just thinking about how, like, sure, Viv has dealt with this herself, like, she has a good relationship with the Madrigal now, but they're still taking advantage of other people. And I know in a story like this, you don't necessarily have to deal with these bigger societal problems. But in my head, I just kept thinking, yeah, sure, it's fine for you, Viv, but what about all the other businesses that are struggling because of this person, you know? It's this, like, sort of group of people. Like, it didn't feel very satisfying, and it felt kind of silly. So I wasn't a big fan of that. And the final thing that I felt for me is, like, this is more of a, like, it is a criticism that I have, but it's not as big as the other ones. But the best way I can describe this is my note that I took on this, which is the slow burn romance too slow? Now I'm going to get into spoilers here, so if you don't want the romantic aspect of the story spoiled, here's your warning. But basically, Viv and Tangery do eventually get together at pretty much towards the very end of the story. And for me, I felt like their relationship was very interesting, but I honestly, and I'm speaking as a pansexual woman, I'm queer, I have been attracted to women before. Their relationship felt very platonic for the majority of the book. They really didn't give off vibes that they were attracted to each other at all, or that they were interested in each other. There were some hints throughout the book, but those hints could easily be still platonic, if you know what I mean. So it really felt, to be honest, I thought they were going to get together at the beginning of the book, And then by the end of the book, I'd almost forgotten that that might be a thing. It felt like it kind of came out of left field at the end. Now, don't get me wrong, like, I think you could see it as being sort of subtle and low-key, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just felt like it might have been a little too subtle because I just really didn't get the vibe that they were interested in each other like that. And when it actually happened, it was really endearing. I actually felt like once things actually did start to heat up, they had a really endearing connection, and the last couple of chapters are really nice and very heartwarming, you know. Uh, I did feel like once they started making that a thing, it was good, you know, but I just felt like it was almost too, as I said, a bit too subtle almost, you know, it was very, very desexualized, and I just thought they were good friends, and you know, I'm queer and I've fancied women, and it went over my head, so it must have been pretty low key. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wrote down about this story. So if I was going to describe this story in one word to keep it simple for you guys, this is a very cozy story. This is cozy. And I would highly recommend it because it's very nice. It's the kind of book that makes you feel warm inside, and I definitely think I'd like to read the prequel. There's another story in the series that's a prequel called Bookshops and Bone Dust, I believe. And yeah, I might read that too and make a review on it when I do. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. So if you get the chance to take this out of the library or pick this up, I would recommend it 100%. This is a very, very nice story to read. And I will see you in my next installment of Rosie Reads. Have a great evening, everybody.